Long before remote control became a plastic object on the couch, it began as a sharper question. Could a machine obey you from somewhere you were no longer standing? That question was bigger than convenience from the start, because once command can travel, danger can stay away, labor can shrink, and human reach can extend beyond the arm. Remote control is really the story of intention learning how to move through space. Once that happened, presence and control stopped meaning the same thing. In 1898, Nikola Tesla demonstrated a radio-controlled boat at Madison Square Garden and showed that a command could cross empty space and still arrive as authority. What startled people was not merely motion, but obedience. The operator and the machine had been physically separated, and the command still held. That was the first famous glimpse of a future in which reach could leave the body behind. It must have seemed almost supernatural, which is often what good engineering looks like just before it becomes normal. A few years later, Leonardo Torres Quevedo pushed the idea further with the telekino, a system he developed in the early 1900s and patented in 1903. By 1906, he had publicly demonstrated short-boat control with ordered signals, helping establish remote control as a structured command system rather than a single brilliant trick. That was the true hinge in the story. Remote control was becoming a language between human intention and machine action. Once engineers saw that a machine could receive instruction from afar, the implications widened immediately. A machine could now go where a person should not go, could not go, or simply no longer needed to go. During the First World War, experiments, including Britain's aerial target, carried that logic into the air and proved that distance command was not confined to wires, rooms, or water. The systems were still crude and unreliable, but the principle had escaped the laboratory and entered the world. By the late 1930s, hobby aviation helped prove something equally important. Remote control could be practical, repeatable, and precise. Walt and Bill Good's radio-controlled model aircraft work showed that this was no longer only the business of inventors and military experimenters. And when a technology survives both the engineer and the enthusiast, it usually starts preparing for ordinary life. Remote control was about to move indoors. It actually reached the home before television made it famous. Philco's 1939 Mystery Control let certain console radios be operated wirelessly from across the room, which meant the household version of distance command had already arrived before TV took all the glory. But the home version of remote control did not begin with channel surfing. It began when the household first discovered that comfort too could be engineered. The 20th century was filling itself with electrical devices, and the public was developing a perfectly understandable preference for commanding them from a chair. Civilization, as ever, advanced partly through genius and partly through not wanting to stand up again. Television is where remote control became culturally permanent. In 1950, Zenith introduced Lazy Bones, a wired controller that could change channels and power the set on and off from across the room. It worked, but the wire offended the room. Convenience had arrived, dragging a cable across the carpet like a practical joke told by engineers. So Zenith kept refining the idea. In 1955, Eugene Polly introduced the Flash-Matic, the first wireless TV remote, using beams of light aimed at photocells on the television. It was elegant, and it was vulnerable. Sunlight and bright lamps could interfere, which meant the room itself occasionally developed opinions about what to watch. That flaw revealed one of remote control's permanent truths. Sending a command is only half the challenge, because the machine must also know that the command came from you and not from the rest of the universe. In 1956, Robert Adler and Zenith answered with Space Command, a practical wireless TV remote that used ultrasonic sound and became the model for television remotes for years to come. Early versions were delightfully mechanical. Press a button, a tiny hammer struck an aluminum rod, and the television interpreted the tone as action. There is something wonderfully elegant about that design. The remote of the future briefly contained a very small percussion instrument. But elegance was not the real breakthrough. The breakthrough was that remote control had become ordinary life. That is where technologies become powerful, because what once amazed us soon starts to feel missing the instant it disappears. Through the 1960s and 1970s, solid-state electronics made remotes smaller, cheaper, and easier to spread across consumer devices. What had once been mechanical cleverness was becoming an ordinary layer of daily life. Then, the home electronics pile began to grow. Television was no longer alone, and now it was joined by VCRs, stereos, cable boxes, and the first signs that one coffee table might soon be asked to govern an empire. By the early 1980s, infrared remotes overtook ultrasonic designs and allowed more complex commands in a more crowded electronics world. Invisible light proved better suited to a future of multiplying devices and multiplying buttons. Progress promptly created a new problem. The remote solved the problem of getting up, then created the problem of having 5 different devices, all insisting they were the rightful ruler of the coffee table. So the next phase was predictable. Programmable and universal remotes tried to gather that scattered authority back into one hand. That is one of the funnier patterns in technological history. We build tools to reduce complexity, then build new tools to manage the complexity created by the first tools. But remote control was always larger than entertainment. The same basic logic spread into radio-controlled model aircraft, garage door openers, industrial control, remotely piloted aircraft, and later, robotics. The principle remained remarkably consistent across all of them. Separate command from the machine, transmit it reliably, and extend human reach without extending human risk. That is why the history of remote control still does not feel finished. The handheld wand is only the most familiar expression of a much larger idea. Today, those controls live in touchscreens, software, voice interfaces, and automated systems. Across more than a century of machines, the same thought continues to unfold. Intention does not need to share a location with action. That is why this subject reaches further than the living room. Remote control did not merely save a few steps, because it changed what closeness meant and reshaped how authority could move. Step by step, engineers taught machines to listen from elsewhere. In doing so, they redrew one of the oldest boundaries in human experience, the boundary between here and there. From a radio-controlled boat in 1898 to the invisible command systems woven through modern life, remote control helped build a world where reach could leave the hand and still remain human. You're always welcome here, and remember, it's Illumentary.